What moved these people to start such a long journey? If God is everywhere, especially during Mass, why would they go looking in such a faraway place?
For
a medieval man to have his sins forgiven was something fundamental, because his whole life was dedicated to achieve life after death. So people embarked on even the most dangerous journeys, covering great distances just to ensure this. For example, think about the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, where they risked martyrdom by the Saracens.
After finishing the trip to the Eternal City, pilgrims had to visit the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul. They were to be seen at least 15 times. Since the earlier centuries, there's been a great devotion to this temple. In the Basilica of St. Paul, outside the walls, is St. Paul's tomb. He is one of the revered apostles.
The two apostles of Rome were martyred at the same time under the Emperor Nero. And the body of Paul, according to the tradition, was brought to the nearest cemetery. At that period, of course, burials were not permissible within the city walls. And there was a small cemetery, a small semi-private cemetery, it seems, connected with a woman of certain nobility called Lucina. And this cemetery in the bend of the river south of the city walls was where Paul was buried.
The latest technology has allowed sampling of the remains which are preserved in the basilica.
The body was transferred, maybe from another coffin, into the new sarcophagus, which was never opened then, until about the year 2006, 2007, when Pope Benedict XVI gave permission to do a limited excavation or inquiry within the sarcophagus, and some remains were found and were dated to the right period, the 1st century, which therefore we can say confirms the constant tradition that St. Paul is buried here.
This impressive building that we see today is the second biggest church in Rome. It was partially rebuilt in the 19th century after a fire destroyed most of the basilica. All of the pontificates are immortalized on the walls of the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. Each mosaic hides the personal, passionate history of the men who represent Christ on earth. One of these men, Pope Clement VI, initiated the second Jubilee in history, but he didn't do it from Rome.
Some popes relocated to Avignon due to the particular political situation. The first of them was Clement V, who was practically forced to stop at Avignon because of King Philip the Fair, who had attacked the Pope, Boniface VIII, in the city of Anagni. Clement V tried to return to Rome, but he was never successful. Finally, he gave up, and his successors were forced to stay in Avignon for 60 years.
One of his successors was the Pope who convoked the second Jubilee. Without leaving Avignon, he declared that in 1350, Rome would celebrate a Holy Year. He is the only Pope that did not attend a Roman Jubilee. Instead, he sent a pontifical ambassador. That Holy Year included important developments. On this occasion, the pilgrims not only had to visit the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul, but also the Basilica of St. John Lateran. The latter was the seat of the popes. A majority of Christians believe the Cathedral of Rome is St. Peter in the Vatican. This is incorrect. Since the beginning of Christianity, Rome's cathedral has been this one, St. John Lateran. In fact, it's the most ancient of all 4 basilicas that belong to the Vatican. There are 3rd century documents that testify to the existence of a church in the same place where the basilica stands today. The second Jubilee coincided with a terrible epidemic. First, black spots appeared, then a cough. After a couple of days, death arrived.
La peste nera nel 1348 arrivò
The Black Death in 1348 interrupted a time of great economic flourishing. It had a devastating effect on Europe because about half of the European population died. This also caused a serious political crisis, but also a deep sense of depression in people who saw too many deaths. Family members, friends, and even the rich and powerful. No one seemed to escape this scourge from God.
Nessuno sembrava al riparo da questo flagello di Dio.
Whoever survived knew that death was always nearby.
È in questo momento che nascono le cosiddette danze.
During this time, the so-called macabre dances were born and were widespread in the 14th century, when you see people of all walks of life, even popes and emperors, dance with death. This had a large effect on faith, because somehow, after calling people to their transient temporal reality, men felt more attracted to the spiritual dimension.
Erano più attratti dalla dimensione spirituale.
Those who arrived to Rome still had work to do before receiving the indulgence.
Then they would need to go to confession, and the sacrament of reconciliation or confession is a fundamental part of conversion, and therefore a practice of particular importance, we could say, in a year of conversion, a holy year. And then there's the obligation to receive the Eucharist at about the same time. So the indulgence, the practices of the indulgence are linked with the pilgrimage, the coming into the holy place in a spirit of conversion.
In addition to changing souls, the pilgrimages caused a social shift and, to an extent, economic changes. A pilgrim needed to eat and sleep. They traveled with skills such as trade and art. Even the newest fashion was spread throughout Europe on these roads, long before runways and fashion magazines. In the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, something significant to the history of the Jubilee happened. It's the first church in which the Holy Door was opened.
Now, the idea of the Holy Door in the four Papal Basilicas, and its particular link to the Holy Year, is to do with the concept of conversion. Because what you do is you move from the profane space, that is the space in front of the temple, the word profano means in front of the temple, outside the sacred space, and you cross the threshold of the door to enter within the sacred space. And that movement from the profane to the sacred is a symbol of the desire for conversion, which is fundamental to the idea of a holy year.
Knocking on the door with a hammer represents the destruction of a sinful life. Years ago, the hammer was not only a symbol, it was used to demolish an actual wall. On some occasions, the act itself became an accident. During the demolition, a chunk of the wall fell centimeters away from Pope Paul VI. Since 1975, popes have been limited to simply knocking on the door with the hammer before opening it. This eliminates any risk. The success of the Jubilees in the 14th century was clear. At this time, Europe was largely Christian. The popes were successful in allowing a year of grace. In 1390, there was another holy year declared. Then, just 10 years later, there was the fourth Jubilee in history. This particular one coincided with another centenary of the birth of Christ in the year 1400. That holy year also introduced novelties. At the beginning, it was enough to visit 2 basilicas in order to receive the indulgence. Now, it was necessary to visit 4 churches, all the major basilicas of Rome. The fourth major basilica that must be visited during the pilgrimage is St. Mary Major. Traditionally, it is said that the location for this basilica was chosen by the Pope after a miraculous snowfall on the Esquilino Hill. It was August 5th, one of the hottest days in a Roman summer, yet snow was gathering on this hill. The snowfall in August was surprising, just like witnessing a downpour of flower petals inside a church. And so the miraculous August 5th snowfall is commemorated by releasing rose petals inside St. Mary Major.